Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR CATI up and running series. And in this video we're going to be looking at how a supervisor can manage their projects, and not just one project but all their projects, and how they can produce reports and tabulations even, so that they can look at both progress and to monitor efficiencies, such as how long each interviewer is taking on a project. So we've looked at some of these tools already, but we're just going to recap and just go over all the things that a supervisor might want to do, or some of the things a supervisor might want to do. Now, one of the things they want to do quite regularly probably is to look at their quota and see how that's progressing and what sample they got left. So we can view the quota file. And if we open up the quota file, at any time we can look at that and we can see how many interviews were wanted, how many have been saved, and how many more are still needed. So that's something that we can manage, and if there are any in progress we could also see that as well, although I haven't got any in progress at this time. And of course, if the supervisor wanted to change that at any time, they would have to go into the supervisor quota, edit quota, and maybe it was proving impossible to get interviews of people who didn't attend the event. So you might want to minus 10 off the wanted figure. Click that, minus 10, and now that's gone down to 10, and so we only need 7 more. And that could all be managed from this particular part of the control panel. The other things that interviewers want to do is to sort of look at their sample. So let's look at the other functions here. So if we scroll down to sample, you can see you can get a summary view. So let's click on that and have a look at what we got. Click on our sample file, and that tells us about the sample file that we have available so far. We just saw just now that we actually need far more than 30 interviews. So for this particular project, more sample would need to be loaded. But we can see of the 30 records on the sample file at the moment, we can look at their profile, whether they're members or non-members, 16R, 14R, event attendees, non-attendees. But we can look also at how many we've got left on our sample file. So we've got 18 left in total, 11 of them are members and so on. And we can see over here how many of those are fresh ones. The difference between fresh and remaining means that these are the 17 people that we haven't tried to call at all, whereas there are 18 people still that are valid for interviewing. Perhaps they at that particular time refused, or we couldn't get an answer. So there's one person in here who we've contacted that's not a fresh interview, but they haven't refused, or they haven't managed to leave the sample because the number was unobtainable or some other reason, but they're still sitting there remaining as part of our sample. Let's look at another option here. We can also go in and look at the serial details. And if we do that, clicking on the sample file, you can see what I get now is a CSV file, which is actually quite hard to read here at the screen because CSV files are probably easier if they're saved. So if we file and preserve that, we can then go to the folder where the project is stored, and we can look at a CSV file that's been produced called View1 CSV. And now this looks a little bit more readable and gives us some information about each of the 30 members of our sample. So if we open this file as we are now, it should open up, and you can see now that we've got some details in here, and we've got the values for certain variables like the status variable and so on. So these key variables, member event, they're all available. And in here, and the telephone number, and in here you could, for example, do pivot tables if you wanted to in Excel, or you could sort these or compare them back to your sample. So this sort of gives you a report of each record in your sample file, which if you know how to use Excel to do analysis, you could use Excel to do that. So let's quit that file and let's go back to our project. And let's look at the next item on the supervisor menu. The next one that's quite useful is an appointment list. So we can click on that. And here it's asking me for a name. So I'm going to call it appointment list. And it gives me a list of appointments. Now that's also a CSV file which will be saved, and I won't bother to open that in Excel, but you can probably see that that's record 29 that has an appointment at that particular date at that time, and so on, and various details about it. Now if we viewed that in Excel, that would be much more easy to read. I won't go through that process here, but you could do that having produced that appointment list. We can move on and look at a list of serials. So let's get a list of serials. Again, we're going to pick the sample file here, and I'm going to call this list of serials, and this one we will open in Excel. So let's just close that. That's been saved, and here's my list of serials, and that does look much better. Again, a bit like the appointment list, but it's actually a full list this time. I'm opening that in Excel. And here we now have a list of the records that have been lost in our sample because they couldn't be contacted or whatever other reason. We can look at the name of the project, but this is really a file that one can analyze. People often write little reports off the back of this or use this to use Excel functions. It shows you who completed the interview and so on. So it gives me a good status of every single project. So this one's finished. If an interview has been completed, you can see that it's been completed, and so the time of the interview is also recorded. So really quite a lot of detail there about each of the interviews that you can use. All right, so that's covered some of the things under the Supervisor menu. Go down to results of calls to get one more thing. Click on test for this, and you can see here I'm getting a list of the different outcomes from the call. I can exit that and open that in Excel. And again, I've got a good summary here, which a project manager might want to see. The supervisor might want to forward to a project manager. And we can see here how many times we've tried each respondent and so on. So here's the outcomes here from our survey. How many times we tried and so on, the number of members and non-members and so on. So we've got a report and we've got 5 completed records, and it's telling me who those 5 are and who the failures are. So really quite a detailed report that's very useful for a project manager to know how a project is proceeding. And if you want to go to the next level, you can start to do cross tabulations. Now, we're not going to really cover doing tables in this particular video because that's fully covered in the other videos in this suite of training videos. But let's just go back to our project and look at perhaps 1 or 2 tables and point out 1 or 2 things that are worth doing. Now, one thing that really is worth pointing out is that if you create any variables, it's a really good idea to keep them as the same name from project to project. So example, V status is a variable. I would always recommend that you keep the same V status variable in every project, and otherwise keep that in your skeleton QDF and always use it and keep it in the same format, call it the same name. The reason for that is that what we could do if we wanted to is to build up a little file of tables that are common that can be used for every project. So you could, for example, do some tables on the status of each project by the interviewer, so you can see how each interviewer is faring. You could do a table showing the average length of interview for each interviewer, and all these tables can then be saved and moved from project to project, so that you automatically had a very detailed report which was customized to exactly what you wanted. So although the supervisor function gives you some sort of standard reports, all this data is available mainly through these ZZZ variables or other variables that you created, and you can create a set of tables that can be used for every single project, tailored exactly as you want them, and something that can be automatically produced at any time during the field work. And that's something I'd really recommend to do. If you're not familiar with tables as a supervisor, hopefully there's somebody who can set up tables for you who perhaps normally works in the cross tabulation team, and I think they could be useful in that particular case. All right, so we're just going to very quickly set up one table here. Users who know how to use the tables, that I say covered in a separate video, will know you can open a tables file and have that common set of tables. We're just going to do one quick table here and look at what that entails. And what we're going to pick here, we're going to pick, let's pick one of the rows here. So I'm going to pick the length of interview, which is ZZZ Sec 99. So that gives me the length of the interview, and I'm going to analyze that by ZZZ SR0, so I can look at the call result. And here's where I might want to be careful about what I pick. So I'm going to click on the global data files here, the global setting, pick the data files. I don't want to analyze the sample file now, so I'm going to remove that, but I'm going to add to the list the main file. So these are the completed interviews, and I can now get a report of how long on average each interview is taken. And of course I could select any tables from this, but you do need to think about whether you want to work on the main file, the main and the partial together, just the partial, and so on. So let's click OK. And I can find from this that the average length of my interview is 48.8 seconds. If I wanted to look at that in terms of distribution, there's an option here that would allow me to list all values. Click OK. And now what I've got is that I've got these interviews here, and you can see that one took 129, another took 48, another 35, and so on. But as I say, the tables that you build here, they could be anything you like. They could be the length of interview, they could be V status. I could run that, and you can see the different interview outcomes down here and so on. So really a full list of different things that you can do. You can set up your own tables that you want, and you can be quite creative with that, but really that's for probably more for people who are used to setting up tables, building that report, making it a standard file that you always use, or a standard report that you can always run in tables. Well, I hope that was useful. That completes this video, and indeed this series on QPS MR CATI up and running. I hope it's been useful to you. Thank you.